Well, good morning and welcome to Cityline. It's great to be in your home. We have a great hour ahead of us. Later on, we'll be talking with the brand new executive director from the Tacoma Farmers Market. Britt McGrath is here to talk about the market, what's new, and what we can expect throughout the whole summer. Brian Flint, the executive director of Sound Outreach, is here to talk about some of the new endeavors that Sound Outreach is into. Speaking of another sound, that would be Sound Transit. Scott Thompson is here to talk about the next phase and how the prior phase went and what we can expect to see in terms of deadlines and completion dates. And then with me right now, I have a delightful individual who works for the city of Tacoma. He is part of the Homeless Strategy Systems and Services Manager. I'm talking about Caleb Carbone. Caleb, welcome to Cityline.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Gosh, you're new on the comfy couch with us.
I sure am. Yeah.
3.5 months new in this position.
Yep.
I love that. So I told you recently I was asked a question where I had to pick between racism or homelessness in terms of what is the bigger problem. And one of my first questions for you is, how is Tacoma addressing homelessness or those who are unhoused?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think in a lot of cases racism and homelessness interconnect so much. And you know, I think the strategy that we're trying to develop in a lot of cases is trying to address both that resolution that was passed and also the emergency declaration of 2017, and trying to combine and thinking about how we can respond to kind of the pandemic of homelessness, racism, and then of course also COVID with that too as well. And so a lot of it is reaction of this is what's happening and this is how we're addressing it. And right now we're establishing a strategy for long-term success in order to be able to address that. And we do it in a few different ways. Outreach, shelter are a lot of big ones that we'll be talking about a little bit today, and what the strategy is moving forward. But that's kind of how we think of it in terms of strategic approach.
You know, I loved what you just said when you said it was the COVID pandemic, and then it was also the Black Lives Matter pandemic, which my friend Pam Duncan taught me that, and I love it when people acknowledge it, because that is important in the step of understanding those who are unhoused.
Yeah.
It feels like one of the buzzwords or one of the hot spots is that word shelter that comes up. What are the various types of shelters that are available at this moment?
Yeah, so we have a few different types of shelter models that are available at this moment. We have congregate shelters, you know, where it's, you know, what I think most people think of shelter types historically, right? Trying to maximize the space with the amount of people that you can serve. You know, beds is kind of usually the big driving point. And for some individuals that works for a short amount of time, hopefully transition them in more stable type of housing, something that long-term type of thing. We also have family shelter type as well, where we are taking care of, you know, family and whole families and not just individuals. And so those are also part of this one as too. But we also have micro shelters.
Yes.
So ones that we have a couple of sites that we already established, both throughout the city, and then we have one that's also in the works too as well with the micro shelter model as well. Those ones, we call them micro shelters because they're not, they think they're mostly known as tiny houses, but they're not really houses, right? They are shelters that are supposed to be in there for a short-term amount of time as we're trying to transition. They usually have heat and they have a bed and they have that, but then shared spaces for community living, for resources like food, showers, you know, stuff like that too as well. So those are some of the other ones, but we also have a mitigation site where, you know, tents that are set up there, so a little bit lower of a barrier for veterans, primarily serve veterans that way. And so that is kind of the goal of what we're trying to do in terms of shelter development, is diversification, and trying to see what types of shelter providers, shelter types that we can establish that have effective impacts, because not every shelter type is best for everyone, right? Because we could maximize space with congregate shelter, but not everybody wants that, and so and not everybody can kind of be in that function depending on trauma and stuff like that too as well. But we're also diversifying shelter providers too as well, and being really intentional about not having just one group of, or a couple of few folks providing shelter. And some organizations, even though it is important for some of those bigger organizations to help us because they have great infrastructure, but also smaller organizations that have other ideas too, that seeing how that impact can be really effective in terms of helping those folks get from exiting homelessness.
Yeah, and that is, boy, that is the big thing there when you say exiting homelessness. And that's for those people who want to exit homelessness. I know you also deal with people who they choose to live in the way they want to live, and they just want acceptance for that. How does what is the HEAL team?
So the HEAL team, they were formerly known as the HOT team, but now they're the Homeless Engagement Alternative Liaison Team is what that acronym stands for. And they provide outreach for individuals who are unsheltered and trying to connect them to both services and shelter that are within the city of Tacoma. And so they go throughout the city to be able to offer those services. Now there's some areas that are have higher impacts that they do focus on, but that's what that team does specifically. And they also partner with their other outreach providers in order to kind of find as many people and help as many people as they possibly can in a short amount of time, depending on where they're at. And to kind of go back with folks that maybe choose to be out there, there's a few reasons why that might be.
That's right.
One is as I mentioned, shelter availability and just types of shelter may not feel comfortable with that. Some others may have been what we would call chronically homeless, where this has been a reality for them for a while, and they may not really actually know necessarily what it would look like to enter into stability.
Yeah.
And so those folks take just a little bit longer to be able to do that. And I think we see a lot more of those in this area of chronic homelessness. And so it just takes more time to work with them. They're not going to be just simply as here's shelter available and they're going to go to it. They need more services on top of that, whether they have barriers in order to get into shelter is part of it too as well, or whether they just aren't ready because they're not mentally ready to be able to do that too as well. So,
and all of that speaks to community engagement, because here you have the HEAL team, here you have your team, and sharing feedback about this group would like to go in here, or this isn't going to be enough for this group. So what does community engagement look like with a shelter development? How does that work? Because it seems so tenuous.
Yeah. Well, so that's great. That's a really important part of what we do in terms of shelter development. We do a community meeting in the beginning to just start to talk about what projects we're going to be doing in specific neighborhoods. And so they kind of get contacted and brought together for an initial meeting. But they also have what they call community advisory. And so throughout each month, they get together to talk about some of their concerns with the providers that actually run those shelter sites. So that's kind of just like a regular, normal procedural thing too as well. But they always have opportunity to interact with us on a regular basis to have any other concerns that might come out too as well. So we're always talking with the community, and we're always working with stakeholders in order to be able to effectively hear what the community's concerns are. But what typically happens in that initial one is there's a lot of concerns, but as time goes on, what communities actually know and learn about those shelters and why they're so beneficial, turns out that they actually come back around and start really supporting those shelters in different ways. You know, maybe they're doing in-kind donations, or maybe they're volunteering in other ways, or making sure they're telling their neighbors why they support this too as well. So they usually become big advocates for the shelter as time goes on.
And my brain says that the softening of the hearts begin because the education is being presented. In these last 3 minutes or so here, I want to ask this question because I see it in various degrees out in the community, Caleb. Why is it so important to be compassionate in the approach to ending homelessness?
Yeah, so one of the best definitions I have heard about compassion is, the typical one of, going into somebody's shoes, right? Walking in their shoes. But there's another tagline to that I often hear, is that just remembering that those aren't your shoes.
There we go.
And so when we're interacting with folks, we can maybe understand and listen and hear what they're experiencing, but we can't understand exactly what they're going through all the time. And so when we approach individuals, that first approach might be just building rapport, right? It might be just, hey, here's my name, and I'm going to remember your name, right? Or I'm going to be able to work within this group, and that starts the easier pathway towards what maybe healing could happen with that individual, and what that could be in terms of a pathway towards exiting homelessness. But that's a really important part, because it's just building rapport and building a name and a face to this individual, not just an issue.
Yeah, trust. Yeah, as in I see you. You are someone's son or daughter.
Yep, absolutely.
How does Tacoma compare with other cities experiencing in helping curb the homeless population?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because in my 3.5 months, mostly we're very in line with a lot of, we've seen different types of shelter types, and we've tried to model some of those or try other things that are kind of new. But often what happens is a lot of cities actually reach out to us. Recently, Albuquerque, the city of Albuquerque, actually came out and visited us, and they went through our shelter types and saw the kind of the models and talked with the providers and stuff like that. I've had Olympia reach out to me recently. I've also had a couple of other cities just asking, hey, how do you develop shelters as a city, and what are those processes like, and what are the some of the shelter type of models, what have you run into, and what are the things that we need to be concerned about. And so we're in a unique situation because of the emergency declaration and what we're able to do. But so sometimes that's a little bit hard to communicate that. But at the most part, a lot of times what we're doing is we're talking with other cities and helping them be able to find what shelter models could work in their areas.
And in this last few seconds here, I want to put a bee in your bonnet. I would love to have you back on this couch. We have summer coming up, we have fall coming up, and that means weather that can be kind of tricky, and it means places are open or they're not open. We might get snow. So Caleb, I'd love to have you back on the couch so you can talk about how we open up and protect our unhoused during that time.
Absolutely, I would be happy to.
All right.
Yeah,
thank you so much for being here today.
I appreciate it, yeah.
We have much more to come on Cityline. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this quick break.